because that last Hellenistic lecture, like I said, it was 20 minutes. There was like 30 minutes in the middle that had to do with last semester and the science and technology of the COVID spread. And it was really good. It fit really well in the lecture, but it's a little outdated for now. And so I found another clip that we're going to use. And so we're going to wrap up Hellenism today. That means the study guide today, I'll grade it and I'll put M's in for anybody who hasn't done it yet. And I've actually posted the lecture for Rome already. Okay. So anybody who wants to get a jump start on that can do that. Let's go ahead and take a look at things here for a second. Let's take a quick peek at the website. And let's go to, right now, Poli-Sci is really worried about their research paper. Well, actually, some people are worried about the research paper. Others are going to be in a world of hurt if they don't get it done. But anyway, so we posted this, and I'm basically trying to simplify things a little bit in a way. Probably should have been doing this all along, but I thought, well, why don't we just, ABC here on these lectures. We're going to call it Study Guide 20. So it'd be like 19, okay, 20. And just label them ABC. And then in the study guide, I have questions from A, questions from B, and questions from C. So you know where to look. All right. Boy, what a great idea that would have been maybe at the beginning of the semester for all of these lectures. But nevertheless, this one should be easier. Let me go and show you what I mean. If I pop this thing open, same thing. Here's the notes. Okay, but it's A. And so the first lecture's really notes heavy. And then we get down to this A. Then the B is a little more research oriented. What's a patrician? You're going to be looking stuff up. Describe dignitas. That's kind of important. So a little more definitional type stuff there. And B for on our grade. And then EQ is more about the essay type questions building. Who was Hannibal? What's the Fabian strategy used by Quintus Fabius Maximus? And then it talks, this is all kind of grouped together, and I kind of count it as one big essay. If you answer all this question, you're going to tell me a bit of the story of that part of Rome. So it's going to work out pretty well. All of this stuff is C up to here, and so you can just listen to C and get all those right. So should help. Should make it easier. Let's see. But it's up there. So if you guys, like some of you are doing, you're just playing, well, go home and listen to the lectures and do them at home. I think listening to the lectures helps, and then you go home and you kind of know what you're listening for. It makes the study guides go easier, but hey, do it your way. By the way, the other thing that's interesting, we had a debate in Poli-Sci today. Why is it when I got rid of the deadlines, especially in world history, more people have actually kept up with what would have been the deadlines?
Really?
You've done a better job than if I'd have given you deadlines. It's pretty cool. I don't know what explains that, but congratulations, I guess. Well done. We used to take like 10% off if you're not in by Thursday, and first of all, it's a nightmare in terms of grading, but it's also didn't seem to work anyway. So not having deadlines, I think, has been a big help where you can fit it in where you can and worry about your classes and balance your schedule a bit. So I'm kind of pleased with this. This was a big experiment for me. I've always had deadlines, and just to say, no, let's just, of course, the deadline, there is a deadline, and it's the last day of the semester. Everything has to be in by the last day of the semester because the semester's over. And that'll be right around May 1st. So be planning, and I'll give you plenty of warning, but everything's got to be done by the last day of the semester or it's too late. Grades have already gone in to the college and to well, you guys don't have college grades to worry about, but to the school. So at any rate, there you go. Rome's ready. And so we'll start a little bit of the origins of Rome today and then get into this. And hopefully, we'll do this all live. But this last lecture here, More Hellenism, Science and Art, look what we did. First 6 minutes, then you skip 30 minutes. So I'm recording that one right now and making that hopefully just a little bit sharper. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead into the regularly scheduled lecture. And let's see, all right, here we go. One of the great gifts of antiquity, one of the great gifts of the Greeks was this whole idea of the Greek culture being spread through the Hellenistic phase, starting, of course, with the conquest of Alexander, but also, too, you have to understand that the Greeks were great tradespeople. They were sailing ships throughout the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, trading with everybody. And they would set up little trading posts in all these different places. So the Mediterranean and the Black Sea and the Middle East all were exposed to the cultural unity of the Greeks, where basically all these political ideas are being shared and spread. Their economic influence was wide. Their linguistic influences were wide. A lot of the rules of grammar and all that kind of thing that we have today came from the Greeks to the Latins, to the Romans, to Western Europe. So there's some threads there that are important. If you live in Russia today, or if you live in some of those countries in that region, they use the Greek alphabet, which is very different looking than the Latin alphabet. It still has the same sounds. They just draw the letters a little differently. The philosophies, right? Don't confuse this with religion. Philosophy is different. But these philosophies are a big deal in Western history. And this idea of ethnic blending that, we say in America, e pluribus unum, from many one, where we're not, dismissing other cultures. We're accepting and embracing other cultures. And the idea too of this urban life is superior. They really believe that this idea of a polis, where you have this city state, and you can, so the ideas of cities and towns where you have libraries, where you have universities, where you have public swimming pools, and you have public events, and like the 4th of July celebrations in America, that kind of stuff. This is something that would be important, including theater. So they'd have, like, for example, you go to New York, it's the most metropolitan city in our country, but they have the plays. They still do plays. Broadway is a big deal. You go to LA, you get a lot of plays, you get a lot of that, but then you get the movie industry too. So these are urban effects. Another thing they gave us was the first advances toward what we would actually recognize today as medicine, when Hippocrates and the science of medicine was born. Now, certainly every culture coming in after, the Muslims, for example, would add a lot to medicine, mathematics, and other things, but they would build on this foundation of Hippocrates doing the fundamental observations of how the human body actually works, right? How, anatomy and all that. And so this is an important starting point. So our medical professionals today still take the Hippocratic Oath, and that is do no harm. When you're trying to heal a patient, don't do something that might be more drastic, where the cure is worse than the disease. But you have to use, judgment, common sense, and you have to use science. You have to prove that these vaccines are working. You have to prove that it's not going to be harmful. Do no harm, right? So this becomes the Hippocratic Oath. And a lot of, countries and civilizations and cultures have what we call wives' tales. I don't know if that's a term your family uses, but wives' tales. Basically, where, women would sit around and say, hey, this is a good cure for this, kid's sick, do this, and all this kind of stuff. But some of the wives' tales are just false, right? For example, one that my wife learned from her parents, who were really creatures of the late 1800s, early 1900s. You got to remember, I'm really old. She's older, and her parents were ancient when she was born. They were quite older because of World War II. Their whole lives got disrupted in World War II, and so they married late and whatever, and had their kids late. But the point is that they learned some of these things from their parents, who were really from what the English would call the Victorian age, which is from Queen Victoria back in the 1800s. Like, for example, you can't take a bath when you're sick. Is anybody, now, by show of hands, okay, I can barely see, I'll squint here and look at a little tiny camera. Anybody get that one? That when you're sick, you shouldn't take a bath? You guys don't get that one, right? Okay, so that's good, because that's not true. How about this one, though? Here's one for sure. Habitual knuckle cracking causes arthritis in later life. How many crack your knuckles? Raise your hand. Any knuckle crackers? Yeah. Well, okay. Now here's the deal. Apparently, no. You guys know what the sound from knuckle cracking is? I of course couldn't hear the answer, but if I could have it relayed, maybe. You guys know?
Juices leaving?
Yeah.
What's that? I didn't hear that still.
Someone said like liquid
Yeah.
leaving
No, you're
pockets,
right.
or someone said
Yeah.
air.
Yeah, air and liquid leaving that spot. And my kids used to crack their knuckles, and I was taught, old wives' tale, don't crack your knuckles or you get arthritis when you get older. It has nothing to do with arthritis at all. Okay. So, I was telling them, don't do that. And they would do it anyway. Here's one though. You've got to, now we don't chew as much gum as we used to. Our society, we used to chew a lot more gum per person than we do today. But nevertheless, gum chewing, if you swallow the gum, because of the substance, the gum substance, right? It remains inside your body for 7 years. Anybody chew gum out there?
I'm chewing right now.
Yeah, you're chewing right now. Just don't put it under my desks, man. That's all I care about. Chew all the gum you want, but don't put it under my desk. I used to hate this. We used to have so much gum chewing in school that literally there'd be like 50 gum things all over underneath all the desks, right? I don't know what the kids were doing. They chew them, you stick it under there and pick it up tomorrow. I don't know what the deal is there. But spit it out, you're good, okay? But if you swallow it, what happens to that? Do you guys know?
Stays in there for 30 days.
Yeah, this is a wives' tale too. It doesn't stay in the body. It'll be there like 3 or 4 days and it'll just go like anything else. I had my dear sweet little granddaughter. She decided there was some grabber screws that she were left out, and she grabs 2 of them and she's playing with them, and she's little kids. We're talking like less than 2, and she's got them in her mouth, and her mom sees that and she comes to grab those screws and get them out of her mouth. Right? She doesn't want her to swallow them, so she just out of spite swallows them. Got one down. Oh, we were worried. And you do have to worry a little bit, because if it punctures anything, then that's a problem. So, of course, they did the old x-ray thing and all that stuff. But you know what? Even that passed right through. Passed right through. So don't worry about swallowing gum. It's not going to kill you. All right, now, don't take a bath and say false. I'm not correcting. False. False. Chewing gum is excreted like any other undigested piece of food or stray object. Okay, so here we go. Now, let's get to some that are actually more problematic. If you make a face when the wind changes direction, like you go, ooh, wind changed direction, your face will stay that way. What? You're looking at me going, Okay. Well, there's a thing called Bell's palsy, and it's a nerve thing on the one side of the face where all of a sudden all the muscles on this side of the face will just droop and drop completely. And you look like some animated thing that you guys would do on your phones, right? Ugh, my dad had it for a while, and they blamed it, of course, on him driving truck, right? And had the window open and it was cold, and it cold on that side, and it caused that. Nothing to do with it. Has nothing to do with that. It's a completely different neurological sort of thing. If you touch a toad, you will get warts. How many have touched toads? Raise your hand. You guys don't go toad hunting?
No.
Toads are great. Frogs are cool, but toads are even better. But if you touch it, you get warts. How many ever had a wart? What causes warts?
Bacteria.
Okay. If you make a face in the wind change direction, say false. The legend is prevalent among sufferers of Bell's palsy and non-scientific health practitioners, but there is no causation. If you touch a toad, you'll get warts. False. Warts are caused by a virus, right? So just like this very thing, COVID is a virus, this is a different kind of virus, which are usually species specific. So in other words, for the most part, unless they jump species, that's when you get problems. See, for example, the coronavirus apparently came from bats, and it jumped species. And that's what made it so deadly, because we'd have no immunities for it. But anyway, almost all viruses that infect frogs or toads do not have the correct receptors to infect humans as well. So hunt all the frogs you want. They're fun. They're fun to catch. Gotta let them go though. That'd be nice. If you feed chocolate to a dog, it will get intestinal worms.
Never heard that. That is not real. No,
that's not true. But can you feed chocolate to a dog? It'll kill a dog. Dogs can't deal with chocolate. I mean, little bits, yeah. If they swallow a wrapper or something.
I like that.
But if they ate like a whole bar of Hershey's, it's bad news for a dog. Here's one you all have to be careful with. How many do these pop rocks things? You know, when you put it in your mouth, really fizzy. You ever done that? If you eat a pop rock, one of those fizzy things, and then you drink a carbonated, like a Coke or something, your stomach will explode. I've had this happen in class. People are sitting there and they drink Coke, and they explode, just disappear, disapparate. Think about this one now. How many have taken some of these pop rock kinds of things that go fizzy and put them in a Coke bottle, put on the lid, maybe a 2 liter, usually a 2 liter, put it in there, and then guess what happens? What happens to that bottle?
Explodes.
And it's loud and it's noisy and can be a bit dangerous. So don't do this at home. But that doesn't happen in the stomach. It won't happen inside your body, because the body's got more acids and things in there that it can deal with. And so it's just like, nah, it's not going to be a problem. But those are some examples, right? One component of chocolate, theobromine, is a mild stimulant in humans, but quite toxic to some other animals, including dogs. So it's actually one of the substances of chocolate that get them. However, dogs are able to eat small amounts depending on their weight, although it's not advised to feed them too much, as a whole excessive amount will kill them. If you consume pop rocks while carbonated drink, well, it just won't happen. Now, some others are culture specific. You may not have this one. A lot of these are, depends on your culture, depends on your background, right? Of your families, right? If you feel a burning in your ears, it means that somebody is talking about you. How many have that one? You have burning in your ears start to twitch. Somebody's talking, eh? No, nobody? Okay. A variation on this is if you hear ringing in your ears, someone's thinking about you. In some cultures, if they hear ringing or their ears twitch, somebody's thinking about them. Somebody's talking about them. Maybe they're saying bad things. I think Japan has this one. This is a big one in Japan. In Pakistan and India and the former USSR countries, some of them, hiccups are a sign that you're being remembered by someone. Whereas hiccups in the West, oh, hiccups, stop your hiccups. But here it's like, that's a good thing. It means you're being remembered by somebody. In Japan, if you sneeze, it means that someone is talking about you behind your back. Achoo! Oh, who is it? Who's saying what about me? It is not possible to verify or disprove. So that's why it lives on. It's going to persist indefinitely, probably, in Japanese culture. Achoo! Who's talking about me? Eating crusts of bread will curl your hair in some cultures, Middle Eastern cultures. These are examples of wives' tales. They're not proven by science. And by the way, if you're going to do good public health, you better practice some science. And since you're in a scientific school, a STEM school, maybe we should pay attention to the science. And I love this particular little clip. I'm going to see if I can get to it. All right, let's go. Yeah, past this one right here. And it's all about one company and their effort to try to get to a vaccine. And they basically were given over $1 billion, right, to produce a vaccine, but it was just a real challenge for them. Where did I put it? Okay, so it's back sooner. Okay, so here we go. Oh, long haulers. Ugh. This is one of the after effects. I think it's after this long haul. Yeah, let's go after this one. Now, this is a medical mystery that we haven't figured out yet. And this is AstraZeneca. We want to talk about AstraZeneca. So it's right here. Sorry, I didn't have this in the right spot. Okay. Sorry. Let me get ahead. Okay. I think it's here. Let's see if it's here.
Minneapolis police officer charged in the death of Georgia. Health officials are
here it is.
Health officials are raising concerns, saying an independent panel questioned whether the company was using outdated data. AstraZeneca stands by its trial information, but vows to share more in 48 hours.
Okay, now let's talk about AstraZeneca. So AstraZeneca is approved in 89 countries, but not this one. In one country, they had 2 people get blood clots. Now, is there a causality? Now, they say their vaccine is as good as any of them in terms of preventing illness and death and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't need to be stored at cold temperatures. It's going to be great in countries that don't have maybe the same capacity that some of the wealthier countries do. But here we're still having to do more science. And so they're halting the approval of AstraZeneca, which was developed in Europe, until we can get to the bottom of that. And I think I've got the Novartis
With
one
the
here.
3 vaccines currently being used, almost 84 million Americans have now received at least 1 dose. For some who have had COVID, the problems, though, persists. A new study finding neurological problems common among so-called COVID long haulers. Here's Ann Thompson.
Now, see, here's a medical mystery now. So many people, and this is, of course, the one I'm worried about. I don't want to get this thing because I want to race this year. I want to go to nationals and go to worlds and whatever. And this would be the end of my competitive career. I mean, I wouldn't be able as an older person compete. And but it's terrible. People are going in and they're surviving COVID, but they're now all these problems, including fogginess of the brain, just total lack of energy. And this is persisting. Some people now have 9 months, 10 months of what they call this long haul problem, and nobody knows what's causing it and how the virus is triggering this one. So let's go ahead and listen to this little report.
With each step,
How's the breathing?
and test,
And I'm just going to strap you in.
Carl Shaughnessy helps decode a COVID mystery.
6 months after your recovery, you are still struggling with issues. Does
Yes.
anyone understand why?
A lot of it's unknowns. A lot of what's going on with COVID is unknown. It affects everybody differently.
By examining heart, lungs, and blood flow, answers may come from post-COVID clinics like this one at Stony Brook Medicine on Long Island.
We'll take a look.
Dr. Surtha Rajupait is at the vanguard of pandemic health.
Is it time to look at COVID-19 as a chronic disease?
The way we're seeing long-term symptoms now, I anticipate we should be looking at it as a chronic disease.
Today, Northwestern Medicine reports a stunning 85% of non-hospitalized COVID long haulers suffer persistent neurological issues, including brain fog, headache, and numbness or tingling. On Shaughnessy's medical chart, irregular heartbeat, diabetes, loss of balance, and brain fog, none of which he had before COVID. His wife, Susan, is a registered nurse.
He was a fully functioning, healthy 57-year-old man pre-COVID.
It's the toughest challenge of their 13-year marriage. Carl spent 47 days in the hospital, 19 on a ventilator.
When Carl came home, he had to learn how to walk and use his arms again.
And live with fatigue, daily glucose checks, and heart problems.
Are things like that caused by COVID, or does COVID reveal them?
I'm not sure that we know the answer to that yet.
Many patients face mental health challenges too.
After living through COVID, there is high anxiety, high stress, depression, sadness.
For the Shaughnessy's, there's also gratitude.
I'm very fortunate to be alive and breathing. I'll take this gladly.
As they seek answers one step at a time. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Comac, New York.
Now, an NBC News exclusive inside a company developing another COVID vaccine. It
Okay,
hopes
now I
will
want
be
to comment on that last one. So see, we still have so much to know. For many, they get it and they don't even know they have it. And then, or it's just like a common little cold. And then for others, it's deadly. And then for others, it's this long haul problem. And when they say chronic, what they mean is it just doesn't go away. It's a lifetime kind of problem. This is why the skeptics were so important to us. Being skeptical about easy answers, because none of these answers are easy. They're very complex. And the idea of empiricism, which is, words you're going to have to look up, empirical evidence, and really researching this. They have a vaccine, they go to clinical trial. It takes months to see if it's going to work or not. And they do enough experiments before they release it to the general public. And AstraZeneca hasn't been approved yet in the United States. Here's another one that hasn't been approved. We're committed to buy 100 million vials of this if they get it right. But this was a company that's been bankrupt off and on again. But they've went from just a few employees to like 800-900, trying to come up with another vaccine to join the trio that we're using now. And by the way, there's dozens of vaccines all over the world. Different countries and companies have different vaccines. We've proven 3 of them through scientific empirical analysis to be safe. And even at that, many are skeptical and don't want to take even those because they're worried about them. But this long haul problem, you know, for me, that was the number 1 reason to get a vaccine. I never feared dying from it, but I did fear spreading it to you or my mom or my sister or my wife. But now that that's less of a problem, boy, I'm glad I got the vaccine because I don't want to turn into a long hauler. And I wish this company luck. This is a company, I hope that this worked. We gave them some money as taxpayers and says, you know, you do your best with a vaccine as these other companies are doing, and everybody see if we can't get a vaccine. Here we go.
A global game changer. With more on that, here's Katie Beck.
Developing vaccines is an uphill race, one that Novavax CEO Stanley Erck has been running for decades.
How close to the finish line do you consider yourself to be at this point?
Well, never close enough, but we are close.
Maryland-based Novavax has been developing vaccines for more than 30 years, but has never had one approved and on the market. Now, a possible victory on the horizon as the company mass produces tens of millions of doses of its COVID-19 vaccine, confident it will be authorized for use in the United States.
Do you believe your product is better than the other ones out there?
I think they all work, and I think everybody should take whatever vaccine that are offered them.
Promising early test results secured Novavax a $1.6 billion contract from Operation Warp Speed to produce 100 million doses for the U.S. But pre-pandemic, Novavax was sinking, suffering setbacks after several failed phase 3 trials.
We had to lay off people. It hurts everybody's morale when you do that.
On the verge of collapse in December of 2019, at times companies' stock trading at $1.
If you've been around it as long as I have, you've seen a lot of experiments fail, but you also see people figure out why and then fix it.
The company's recent data from phase 3 trials of its COVID-19 vaccine show 96% efficacy, and against the UK variant, 86%.
Everyone comes here, checks in, temperature.
NBC News was the first crew allowed into this biotech lab in College Station, Texas, where vaccine production is bustling.
We are focused on making as much vaccine as we possibly can.
Here at the Texas facility, 80,000 square feet transformed to produce COVID vaccine as quickly as possible. Now, they've added 300 employees and are making millions of doses inside those bioreactors every month.
Novavax paired with the biotech arm of Fujifilm to use this space, tapped by the federal government years ago as an emergency vaccine site in case of a pandemic.
And in poli-sci, we learned about the Defense Production Act, which enables the U.S. government to ask companies to provide facilities to other companies during times of national emergency. So let's hope the Novavax vaccine works and that it's been approved. We have a government agency called the Food and Drug Administration that double checks all the data to make sure that they're not lying to us. They do the empirical tests and then they do double checks of the empirical tests, 3 phases of trials before we go widespread with these vaccines. So I just wanted you to see the science here, the empirical research that goes into it. And remember, the key word here is empirical research, where we are skeptical until we've proven the truth claim. So it goes back to the skeptics, right? And so we owe the Greeks a lot, this whole idea of this mentality where we prove things before we jump into them, being very, very important. All right, well, let's wrap up. That was an important piece, I think, for the Hellenistic influence on us today. I thought that hopefully brought it up to modern times and made it just a little more relevant to today. So we just don't say, hey, Hellenism was great, it impacted us today. Well, how? Well, now you know. There's a good example. Also, the Greeks would influence poetry, literature of all kinds. And of course, they were big students of their own literature, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and so on. But they had, these archaic literature epics with Homer, early poets, fragments of which survive. Then you have Archilochus. I can't say that name. I mess that one up every time. Archilochus, okay, who was wrote about the life of a Greek warrior back in 650 BCE. That still survives as written text. Sappho of Lesbos was really important. Lesbos is a big island off the coast of Ionia, and wrote love poetry. One of the first to do that. There was love poetry and stuff written in Egypt and other places too, but this was very different. It's much more like what we would consider maybe a modern style, if you will, but also was one of the first authors to drill down on the plight of women in male-dominated society. And this becomes kind of an important work at that. In other words, very, very much the issues we're talking about today about equal rights for women, equal pay for equal work, all this kind of stuff, really important, diversity. She was talking about way back in Greek times. Pindar, this guy was the greatest of the classical Greek poets. Here's his dates, 518 to 438, lived a long time. He would write, believe it or not, eulogies to athletes. So here you have, basically he was a sports writer. And he wrote, all these wonderful poems and things about these great athletes that would win at the Olympics. He wrote hymns to the gods, which is kind of cool. You're going to see hymns being written throughout the medieval period, for example, to be sung in Christian churches, which were basically designed in such a way that this music would run through these big cathedrals in just a really amazingly cool way. Well, he's kind of one that started that kind of thing. He used complex language, vivid imagery, and so we owe a lot. When you go to your English class, you owe a lot to the Greeks. In terms of drama is important. But they had drama, comedy, and they had tragedy. So they had like kind of three genres of plays that they would do. And we still owe them for this. When we sit down and we watch Netflix during COVID, I don't know how any of us would have survived COVID without Netflix. Raise your hand if you binge watch something during this pandemic. Raise your hand. How many binged watch the same thing twice, maybe 3 times? Yeah. I've seen Thor, that trilogy, 3 times. Well, it's a great character. But by the same token, talk about being bored out of our minds if we hadn't had drama, tragedy, and comedy invented by the Greeks. Because what we see on Netflix, what we see in our popular media was invented here. They, for example, would have a festival. It's called the Festival of Dionysus. Now, it was kind of one of those, before the term hedonism became a term, it was kind of a big party. It was, a little crazy. But by the same token, there would be ritual festivals of dance and song and dramatic competitions. They would actually do these 3 times a year, where it'd be like the Sundance Film Festival, where they would pick a winner 3 times a year. These playwrights would compete in writing plays, and the winner, right, had huge acclaim. And then that play was taught to others and went all around to amphitheaters all around Greece, later all around the Roman Empire too. And it basically gives birth to this Western tradition of drama and cinema. If you go to, for example, London today, you got the theater district, direct causation. You look at Broadway's direct causation. You look at Hollywood, direct causation. You look at Bollywood in India, direct causation of the form of popular entertainment that they created. They create these big amphitheaters so they could hear really well, and the staging was often elaborate at the far end. Now, it was all male actors though, okay? All male actors. So if there was a female character, they would dress up, and they also wore these masks. So you knew if they were happy or sad. I mean, you're sitting up in the cheap seats, right? So you see the mask, oh, they're sad, or they're happier. This is a joke. This is somebody that's doing a satire, something funny. But these plays became the thing long before Shakespeare. That was a Shakespeare quote, by the way, just so you know. At any rate, themes were based on well-known legends and myths. And when you look at for example, the success of the Marvel series, this was a comic kind of book thing when I was a kid. And these stories were well known. We'd read these little comics, we'd buy them, they'd be like 5 cents, 10 cents each. And we'd get them, sometimes mailed to us every week and whatever. But they were well-known characters that have now been blown up on the big screen. And now, of course, the Netflix screen, right? Or I guess Disney now owns them all, right? So Disney Plus. But at any rate, they dealt with human emotions, love, hate, greed, and fear. The same things we have today. The struggle of man against fate. It's always this hero taking on impossible odds, right? This kind of thing. But with the dramas of this time period, the tragedies, there was always a tragic flaw of the protagonist. And often there would be in these dramas a descent into madness. So they would start out great, doing all these wonderful things. And then there was this flaw, and the flaw would lead to their demise. And when you look at a lot of the TV dramas today, isn't that the case? You build somebody up as this great character. One of my favorites is Venom. I don't know if you've ever seen Venom. Maybe I shouldn't recommend it because it's a little violent, but nevertheless, you get this creature from outer space, right? Inhabits a human body, whatever. But you got this really bad guy who's made a lot of money. He's basically Elon Musk, and he's just kind of type person. Not Elon Musk. He's not that kind of guy, but this guy was, and he's going to use this for evil, and eventually it leads to his destruction, right? It's a theme right out of ancient Greece. Here's a good example of one of the masks, right, that they would wear. The greatest of all the playwrights that we still have written plays for, including Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes. Yeah, kind of get to know those guys. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes. And they would often, some of them were contemporaries of each other, would compete. Sophocles was considered the greatest of the Greek dramatists, right? He wrote two very, very famous plays that are still often done. I know Southern Utah University down here had a summer festival of these Greek plays. They do Shakespeare mainly, but they would branch out into this and still do Oedipus. It's a story of fate, arrogance, and justice. It's very important. This Oedipus story finds its way into modern psychology through Sigmund Freud. It's a very powerful story. Antigone is a really important one. This one explains the role of women in Greek society, the injustice and the tyranny of their lives, which would really play today as well. Timeless stories, if you will. And so many of our modern stories, they're just taking these and updating them, right? Maybe without even knowing it. Aristophanes was more of the comedian type. And his job was to make people laugh, just like comedians of today. And it was serious, what we call satire. And satire is where you take an incident and you do a mock of it. I think the best example I can give you is like Saturday Night Live, right? Saturday Night Live does these mock things of, they have fun with these characters. It might be the president, President Biden, and he stumbles or something, and they do a skit about it. But they're important also as political statements. And if you listen to comedians at night, and they're talking about the actions of a president or whatever, they're mocking to make a point. And that happened in ancient world too. The Greeks were good at that. Thinly veiled mockery of political leaders. Pericles was often the subject of these basically satire type comedies. Now, he laughed along. Another one was Socrates. He was often parodied, you can see this pot here, parodied as a bumbling dreamer that was always, doing bumbling things and saying these crazy things and providing kind of that moment of levity in the middle of a serious story. They mocked people then, we mock people now in our comedy today, just pretty much the same way. Now, switching gears here from theater and literature to sculpture. The Greeks, wow, what they did to sculpture was insane. These modern, beautiful forms. Here's the winged Athena right here that's still in the Louvre, what's left of it. I mean, remember, these are really old. They would do sculpture in wood, gold, and ivory, precious metals, bronze, like the Colossus of Rhodes. would be, but marble was an astounding achievement. Marble, and listen to this, because I know some students that aren't listening to this, but okay, now they're listening. Why is marble? Marble is a relatively soft stone. So as stones go, it's easy to carve, and then it's really easy to polish. And it can produce this amazing luster. And those that survive from the Greek period, and then later in history, in a period called the Renaissance, they would revive the Greek sculpture into modern times, like Leonardo da Vinci, like Michelangelo, and other great sculptors that would use the techniques that the Greeks had. But the Greeks were with realism. You make it look like a real person and keep these certain proportions that the human body has, and so on. So they were genius at it. Here's one right here. How's that? That's a modern artist who's using a Greek form to create the discus thrower, right? And this is a very famous sculptor of modern times using the Greek kind of model. Okay, so the archaic period, their art was structured and formalized like Egyptian art, but during the classical period, during the Hellenic age, and then later the Hellenistic age, they became much, much more real depictions of actual muscles and strength and all this kind of stuff. The detail is amazing. The Acropolis, the sculptures on the Parthenon, the reliefs, sometimes only 3 inches deep, the relief, but it looked like it was a 3D thing. Praxalexis, he was a great. Phidias, these are some of the great sculptors of that time period. Even down to their making of vases, vases, pottery. They had this thing basically called, I think, black, what's it called? Black. They basically covered everything in black, but in such a way where these red tones would come out once it was fired. And these were designed to sell products, to make people happy. They didn't need to go to all this effort. But when you see Greek pottery from this time period, it is stunning and fetches hundreds of thousands of dollars for any piece. And by the way, they should only be in museums because private owners shouldn't have these. Everybody should be able to see these. These are amazing things. But anyway, here's a good example right here. And then they would do frescoes. Frescoes are on walls. The Mycenaeans did, not Mycenaeans, but the Minoans did frescoes. We've shown you those before. And then stunning mosaics. Remember the mosaic I showed you of Alexander the Great? That was a floor, that great mosaic. Now, they also were big on building buildings, great in architecture. And they had these columns that they would use in the front. And the reason the columns work in a Mediterranean climate is you put columns and columns within columns, the breezes could come through and the light could come through, but the rain wouldn't. So it was great for that Mediterranean climate to have, you know, columns and then inner columns and then into the inner sanctum and whatever, but you get the breezes blowing through, the light coming through, and at the same token, it would hold the stones above them that held the ceiling up, keep those stones up there. And so you have these different arches at different columns rather, at different periods of their history. Here's the Doric column, and you're going to need to know this. These are Doric, you can tell by the rounded style, very classic. Then you have the Ionic from different part of Greece, but they're much more curlicuey and look like a scroll. And their fluted columns are more narrow. And then you get the Corinthian column from Corinth. And Corinthian columns were much more ornate and carved in stone. And many of these still survive. So Corinthian, Ionic, and Doric. The Romans would pick up on all of this. And they would take the Greek style of architecture and make it monumental. Where the Greeks made it beautiful and proportional, the Romans would make it big. And that's, of course, much more difficult. But it's easier if you have geometry, which the Greeks gave us too. Here's Pythagoras. The Pythagoreans lived in southern Italy. They were a religious brotherhood of math. Okay, when you get to UCAS up on campus, you know, it's almost like we have that group is still there. The math thing, we do really well with math. They believed in reincarnation and asceticism, which has nothing to do with mathematics. But they believed this, that the universe could be explained by numbers. that you could define everything in terms of number theory. And geometry was a big part of that. Even music can be defined completely numerically, and that is absolutely true. One of the greatest programmers I ever worked with was also a great musician. And I said, you know, when do you find time to do your music, play the trumpet? He said, I see music as a mathematical formula. All the notes are a particular frequency caused by a certain wavelength of a certain, say a guitar, for example. You take a guitar string and you put it down on the frets at different points. It creates a different frequency, different wavelength. All of music is math. That's why you can create these synthesizers now, you know, these like you have like an organ type thing. We have all these sounds and stuff in a little box about this big because it's all just math. Music is just math. Kind of interesting. The expansion of all of this thing, of what we would call science, empirical science, challenged the nature of Greek gods. Now, you remember Greek gods were not really the most reliable ones. Movement to make sense out of the observable universe, because the gods of the Greeks had no explanation for it. Speculation and observation were, well, speculation was replaced by observation. It's the beginning of, keyword here, you ready? Rationalistic inquiry. Rationalistic inquiry. They invented all sorts of things like water clocks, which were very accurate, pumps, which we still use today. I have a sump pump here, and when it flooded the other day, the sump pump wasn't working. We just had to get the float fixed, and pretty much it drained. You can't believe how many hundreds of gallons of water it drained in a matter of seconds. Thank you, Greeks, for that idea. Siege machines, where you can actually attack a wall and, you know, go over a city that's got big walls to defend it. Archimedes of Sicily, this one Greek, invented pulleys, catapults, hydrostatics, the value of pi. Yeah, they knew the value of pi. Tell me the value of pi. What's pi? Tell me. Pi is what? 3.14156535. Love it. I love it. Only at UCAS could I ask that question and somebody give me the immediate answer. Well done.
It was like 6 of them in unison. It was awesome.
Yeah. Was that what was happening there? Well,
Yeah.
well done, you. And I think that's fantastic. But this was the Greek that figured this out and trying to get circumferences, right? And figure out how to make math work in a circle. A movement to make the sense out of the observable universe. We talked about that. Oh, wrong slide. Okay, now the problem is, though, is that Greece, despite all of its intellectual achievement, and maybe all of these Greek city-states going a different way that caused all this energy, right? I don't know. But once again, Macedon, this is now later in their history, conquers Athens, conquers Sparta, goes on a roll again. But then they get into it with a group called the Romans, who are at war with a group called the Carthaginians, and that's our next story. And they picked the wrong side of that war. Rome, right? Basically, here's the thing. They were in a life and death conflict with a group of Phoenicians called Carthaginians. And Philip of Macedon, a later Philip, I think Philip the Fourth or something like that, got into a war with this little place called Rome in 212, and then another one in 198, and they failed. And because it was just them going on, all of Greece wasn't united against this Roman push, the Romans took over Greece. United we stand, divided we fail. And look, as a country like ours, right? We need to stand united in so many things or we're going to fail too. Like, you know, let's defeat this virus together. It's the only way to do it. But look at this. Roman rule was very soft compared to where Rome ruled in other places because they had a measure of respect for the Greeks. They loved their art. They loved their literature. They loved their science. They loved the Olympics. And so they admired Greek culture. They took Greek slaves as their kids' tutors, right, among the ruling classes. But eventually, Greeks being Greeks, always rebelling and whatever, the Romans finally had to put the hammer down. But there's a famous phrase. Rome conquered Greece, but then intellectually and culturally, Greece would conquer Rome. And Greece remained the language of the common people, despite Latin being the official ruling language. Now, actually, that's probably the best place to stop because this gets really confusing and I don't want to go into any more detail on that. I would go into much more detail when this was the college class at this point, but I think that's a great place to stop. And we'll just see you guys live next week.
Yeah.